Rain was pounding against the windshield that night when Ethan Reed got the call that shattered his world. His wife Sarah, gone. A car accident. A drunk driver, they said. Ethan dropped to his knees, his 7-year-old daughter Grace screaming in the background, "Where's Mommy?" But 3 years later, as he slid behind the wheel of a black luxury SUV for his mysterious new employer, a billionaire recluse who hadn't left her mansion in years, Ethan had no idea that the truth about Sarah's death was sitting in the back seat all along. The town of Oak Ridge moved at a gentle rhythm, its tree-lined streets masking the quiet struggles of those who lived there. At the corner of Willow Lane stood Ethan Reed's house, paint peeling, porch sagging, and bills piled high on the kitchen table. Once a Marine, now a widower, Ethan carried grief like a second skin. The memory of his late wife, Sarah, lingered in every corner. And yet, each day, he rose for his daughter Grace. At 38, Ethan bore the weight of a man much older, his eyes shadowed with sleepless nights and silent battles. Neighbors greeted him kindly, but whispers followed him. That poor man, raising her alone. He didn't resent their pity. What pierced him was hearing Sarah's name. The sound of it still made his chest tighten. Her laughter haunted the house like a melody that refused to fade. Grace, 7 years old, carried Sarah's light in her hazel eyes and mischievous grin. She was Ethan's reason to get up in the morning, the spark that kept him alive. But children ask questions no parent can answer. Why did Mommy have to go? Why didn't God save her? Ethan would hold her close, whispering comfort he barely believed himself. She was his strength, even as his heart broke. The bills didn't stop, no matter how hard he worked. Construction jobs brought in just enough for food, never enough for the mortgage or Sarah's hospital debt. Each envelope stamped "Final Notice" felt like another wound. Nights stretched long as Ethan stared at the cracked ceiling, wondering how much longer he could last. Pride kept him from begging, but desperation was louder than dignity. He was a soldier with no fight left. One winter morning, as he clumsily braided Grace's hair, she laughed and said he was getting better. That little laugh gave him enough strength to face the day. At school drop-off, other parents watched with soft eyes, pity tucked behind polite smiles. He kissed Grace's forehead, hiding the storm inside. In 3 days, they could lose the house, and Ethan had no plan left. That afternoon, his tired eyes caught a strange job listing. Private driver wanted, high pay, discretion required. The salary was unreal, more than he could ever dream. Caution whispered in his gut, but eviction loomed louder. With trembling hands, he dialed the number. The voice on the other end spoke with authority, and before long, an interview was set. The Whitmore estate was unlike anything Ethan had seen, a fortress of stone and silence hidden behind iron gates. Security men checked his ID with the precision of soldiers. As the gates opened, unease gripped him, a chill crawling down his spine. Wealth of this scale never came without secrets. He tightened his grip on the wheel, stepping into a world far from his own. Inside, assistants handled the interview with cold efficiency, their words sharp and deliberate. No questions about driving, only about loyalty, obedience, and silence. The contract felt less like employment and more like surrender. When it ended, one line sealed his fate: "You start tomorrow." Ethan walked away holding papers that promised salvation, but his gut told him it came at a cost. That night, Ethan sat by Grace's bedside, watching her sleep under the soft glow of her nightlight. He thought of Sarah, of the vows he had made at her grave to keep their daughter safe. This job could save their home, erase the debts, and give Grace a chance at a stable future. He kissed her forehead, whispering promises of tomorrow. In his heart, he prayed this was the miracle he needed. But as midnight passed, a heaviness lingered in his chest, the kind that no victory could erase. This wasn't just another job. It felt like a doorway into something darker. The Whitmore mansion seemed less like an employer's home and more like a trap. And waiting inside those walls was a secret linked to Sarah's death. Ethan just didn't know it yet. Ethan's first morning on the job was wrapped in silence. At exactly 6, the garage doors opened and a black SUV gleamed under the dim light. Margaret Whitmore appeared, elegant yet distant, her face hidden behind dark glasses. She slid into the back seat without a greeting, only one word: drive. Ethan's heart pounded as he shifted the gear, wondering what kind of woman never stepped foot outside her car. The route appeared on the GPS automatically, destinations already programmed. Margaret didn't speak, her attention locked on her phone, voice sharp as she handled business calls. "Close the deal. Fire him if he resists," she snapped into the receiver. Ethan pretended not to listen, eyes fixed on the road, but her cold authority filled the air like ice. The woman was more than powerful, she was dangerous. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Margaret never stepped into an office, never shook a hand, never crossed a lobby. Every meeting happened through tinted glass, assistants approaching her car like pilgrims at a shrine. Ethan drove her across the city, but it always felt like she carried her world inside those back seats. And behind her stillness, Ethan sensed a storm she carefully hid. One night, traffic slowed, and Ethan caught a glimpse of something unexpected in the mirror. Margaret's hand trembled as she held a small silver locket, her eyes glistening before she quickly shut it away. It was the first time he saw her mask crack. She noticed his glance and asked softly, "Do you have children?" The question startled him more than her usual commands. "Yes," Ethan answered after a pause. "Grace, she's 7. For a moment, Margaret's gaze softened, the sternness melting into sorrow. "I once had a son," she whispered. "Michael. He died. Drugs." Her voice carried a weight Ethan knew too well, the voice of someone shattered by loss. Silence lingered, heavy and fragile, until Ethan finally spoke of Sarah's death for the first time in months. "She was everything to me," he said, gripping the wheel. "And one night, a drunk driver, she was gone." His voice broke, but Margaret didn't look away. Her eyes glistened with something between pain and guilt. "Loss makes prisoners of us all," she murmured. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time, he saw not a billionaire, but a grieving mother. From that day, a strange bond formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Margaret began to ask more questions, not about loyalty or business, but about Grace, about Ethan's life before tragedy. In return, she spoke of Michael, of his laughter and his downfall. Each conversation was a knife, cutting old wounds open, yet oddly healing. Ethan started to wonder if fate had tied them together for a reason. But suspicion gnawed at him the more he learned. Why had Margaret locked herself away for years? Why did she never step out of the car, never face the world? He noticed how her assistants hovered nervously, how every move seemed rehearsed, controlled, guarded. Something about her grief didn't feel natural. It felt staged, as though hiding a deeper truth. One evening, Ethan pulled into the driveway of the Whitmore estate and caught sight of Margaret staring at a photograph. A young man's face, smiling, full of life. She clutched it like a lifeline, her lips trembling with words unspoken. Ethan recognized the haunted look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. He wanted to ask who the man truly was, but fear kept him silent. Ethan drove home that night, his thoughts restless, his chest heavy with unease. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just a reclusive billionaire drowning in grief. She was hiding something, something tied to her son, something that made her fear the world outside those gates. As he kissed Grace goodnight, a chill ran through him. For the first time, he wondered if taking this job had pulled him into a storm bigger than he could survive. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan found himself caught between gratitude and suspicion. The paycheck was more than he'd ever dreamed of, enough to pay debts and keep the house safe. Grace had new shoes for school, warm meals, even laughter at bedtime. Yet the more Ethan drove Margaret, the deeper his unease grew. Wealth this vast didn't come without shadows, and Margaret carried many. She never left the car, not once. Meetings, signings, confrontations, all orchestrated from the back seat. Ethan began noticing patterns, destinations that made no sense, conversations that stopped the moment he glanced in the mirror. She trusted him to drive her anywhere, yet treated him like a pair of hands on a wheel. And still, in her silences, Ethan heard something more, a secret she couldn't bury. Late one evening, he watched Margaret clutch a photograph of her son, Michael, whispering his name like a prayer. For a flicker of a moment, Ethan felt pity. She was just a broken mother. But then he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, not just grief. The image of Sarah lying lifeless after the crash surged into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling Margaret knew more than she admitted. Driven by instinct, Ethan started digging. Old newspaper clippings, court records, whispers from veterans of the Whitmore Empire. At first, everything was sealed tight, buried by money and influence. But Ethan had lived through war. He knew how to chase the truth through shadows. Slowly, a name began to resurface, the name he had buried with his pain, Michael Whitmore. One night, alone in his kitchen, Ethan found it, a police report half erased by sealed records. The night Sarah died, the driver responsible was listed before being struck from the file. Ethan's heart nearly stopped as his eyes read it again and again. Michael Whitmore, Margaret's son, the man who had killed Sarah, shielded by money and silence. Rage burned through him, hot and merciless. Grace's voice broke his spiral when she wandered in, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy, why are you crying?" she asked, her innocence cutting him open. He wiped his face quickly, pulling her close. "Just tired, sweetheart." But inside, his chest was collapsing under the weight of the truth. The man who had destroyed his world had lived untouched, and Margaret had let it happen. The next morning, Ethan drove Margaret in silence, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Every word she spoke felt poisonous, every breath a lie. He imagined slamming the brakes, demanding answers, forcing her to confess. But Grace's face flashed in his mind. If he lost control, he could lose her too. So he swallowed the storm, for now. Margaret seemed to notice his coldness. "You're quieter than usual," she said, her voice softer than before. Ethan forced a thin smile, just thinking. But she studied him with sharp eyes, as though she knew exactly what truth he had uncovered. Her silence after that was not ordinary. It was heavy, watchful, almost waiting. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stared at Sarah's photo on the nightstand, her smile frozen in time, while anger pulsed through his veins. He wanted to tell Grace the truth, to scream it into the world, to tear down Margaret's empire with his bare hands. But revenge would destroy them both, and Grace would lose him too. He was trapped in a cage of grief and rage. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't just Margaret's driver. He was part of her secret. Every mile he drove her, every silence they shared, felt like quicksand pulling him deeper. He didn't know what Margaret wanted from him, or why she had chosen him of all people. But he knew one thing with certainty. The truth about Sarah's death was only the beginning. Ethan could no longer carry the weight in silence. One late night, after dropping Margaret at the estate, he left the car running and turned in his seat. His voice shook with rage as he forced the words out. "It was Michael, wasn't it? He killed Sarah." Margaret's face went pale, her hand trembling on the edge of her locket. She didn't deny it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. "Michael was the driver that night." Ethan felt fire rise in his chest, his hands clenching the wheel until it groaned. "And you knew. You paid them off. You let me bury her alone while he walked free." Tears blurred his vision, rage and heartbreak crashing into each other. For the first time, Margaret looked afraid. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes pleading, desperate. "Michael wasn't my blood. He was the son of a man I hated." Ethan froze, confusion battling fury. Margaret's voice broke as she went on. "I adopted him, to ruin him, to destroy the one who destroyed me." The confession twisted the air into something darker. Her story spilled out in pieces, jagged and raw. Years ago, a rival had stripped her life bare, took her husband, ruined her family, left her with nothing but vengeance. She adopted his son as a weapon, intending to shape him into his father's downfall. But love betrayed her plan. "I tried to make him a pawn," she whispered, tears running. "Instead, he became my child." Ethan's heart pounded in disbelief. The man who killed Sarah wasn't raised in cruelty by chance. He was raised in hatred by design. Yet Margaret's face was broken, hollowed by regret. "When Michael spiraled into drugs, I tried to save him. When he killed your wife, it destroyed me too." Her voice fell to a whisper. "I have been paying for it every day since." Ethan wanted to lash out, to scream that nothing could undo Sarah's death. But his throat closed, his rage tangled in her sorrow. He saw not just a billionaire, but a woman devoured by her own mistakes. The silence between them burned, both of them prisoners of choices that could never be undone. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth was far worse than the lies. "You hired me," Ethan said finally, voice low and bitter. "Not for my skills. You wanted me close. You wanted to see if I would find out." Margaret's silence confirmed it. "Or maybe," he continued, "you wanted me to kill you." Her tears fell freely now, glistening in the dim light of the car. She didn't argue, because it was true. The car sat idling, its engine a faint hum against the storm inside. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, caught between revenge and restraint. He imagined dragging her from the back seat, making her pay for every second of Sarah's stolen life. But Grace's face, soft and fragile, broke through the rage like sunlight through smoke. He couldn't destroy himself for vengeance, not when she needed him whole. Margaret's voice cut through the silence. "There's more you don't know," she said softly, as if each word cost her breath. Her rival, the man she once sought to ruin, was not only tied to Michael, but to Sarah's death in ways Ethan could not yet see. "He is the true enemy," she whispered, "the one who set every piece of this in motion." Ethan's heart froze. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, the world no longer felt the same. Margaret wasn't just his employer. She wasn't just the mother of Sarah's killer. She was a woman with blood on her hands, secrets in her heart, and an enemy still lurking in the shadows. And now, Ethan was standing at the edge of a truth that could destroy them both. Ethan's chest burned with a fury he could no longer contain. Margaret's tears did nothing to silence the storm inside him. Every memory of Sarah, her laughter, her warmth, her final kiss before that night, flashed before his eyes. He wanted vengeance, wanted to rip apart the empire that had shielded her son. Yet Grace's small voice in his mind whispered, "Don't leave me, Daddy." Margaret's empire was crumbling, enemies closing in from every direction. She confessed that one man, her old rival, was behind it all. He had been the one to lure Michael into drugs, the one who whispered poison into his life until he was lost. Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized Sarah's death wasn't chance, it was fallout from this man's cruelty. Michael was a weapon, and Sarah was collateral damage. The truth cut deeper than any blade. Ethan's grief twisted into something sharper, colder. Revenge no longer felt like a choice. It was survival, justice, redemption. But revenge meant danger, and danger meant risking Grace's future. His heart warred with itself, torn between the father who needed to protect and the husband who needed to avenge. He had never felt so broken. Margaret saw his struggle, her eyes hollow yet burning with desperate hope. "Help me," she whispered. "Help me end this." Ethan turned, his face carved from stone. He thought of Sarah's grave, the promises he made to never let her memory fade. He thought of Grace, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the darkness circling her family. Then he made his choice. "We do this my way," Ethan said, voice low and steady. Margaret's breath caught, relief and fear tangled together. Together, they would dismantle the monster who had destroyed both their lives. Not with guns, not with blood, but with truth sharper than any weapon. For the first time since Sarah's death, Ethan felt something burn inside him again. Purpose. Their plan began in shadows, gathering evidence, tracing money, exposing the strings their enemy pulled. Ethan used the discipline of a soldier, precise and relentless. Margaret provided resources, her wealth turning into a weapon of its own. Every piece of evidence brought them closer to the man who had haunted her for decades and had unknowingly stolen Sarah from Ethan. The hunt had begun. But the closer they came, the greater the danger grew. Mysterious cars followed Ethan home. Strange voices lingered on the phone before cutting out. One night, he found his mailbox smashed, a warning scrawled in red, "Stop digging." Grace's safety became his deepest fear. He tucked her in tighter at night, his heart aching with dread that history might repeat itself. Ethan's rage sharpened into steel. He refused to let Grace suffer the way Sarah had. Margaret stood beside him, no longer just a billionaire in shadows, but a grieving mother seeking redemption. Their lives, broken by loss, were now bound by vengeance. The line between justice and obsession blurred, but Ethan didn't care. He had already stepped into the fire. The final confrontation loomed. Ethan knew he was walking into the lion's den, but there was no turning back. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to his shoulder before he left, whispering, "Bring him down." Her eyes glistened with a mix of fear and faith. For Sarah, for Michael, for Grace, they had to end this. And Ethan was ready to risk everything. As he drove into the night, headlights cutting through the darkness, his pulse thundered like drums of war. This was the moment his life had been leading to since the night Sarah died. No courtroom, no lawyer, no deal could give him what he wanted. He wanted truth, he wanted justice, and he was willing to tear the world apart to get it. The storm ended, not with violence, but with exposure. Ethan and Margaret worked side by side, gathering the evidence that others had buried under money and power. Financial trails, secret recordings, names of men who had been bought, all laid bare. When the truth came crashing into the public, the man who once controlled everything suddenly had nothing. For the first time, justice felt real. News outlets devoured the scandal, cameras swarming the man who had destroyed so many lives. His allies scattered, his reputation shredded beyond repair. He was left stripped of power, a hollow figure drowning in disgrace. Margaret watched from the safety of her mansion, silent tears rolling down her face. "This doesn't bring him back," she whispered, holding Michael's photograph close. But Margaret knew she had a choice, to let guilt consume her or to use what remained for good. Her billions, once used to build walls, became a lifeline for others. She founded rehabilitation programs, funded scholarships, and opened shelters. "If I couldn't save my son," she said softly, "maybe I can save someone else's." For the first time in years, her voice carried hope. Ethan's life began to mend in small, quiet ways. The debts that had haunted him vanished, erased by his steady paycheck and careful planning. He repaired the roof Sarah once worried about, planted flowers in the yard she had loved. Grace had a room filled with light again, walls decorated with new drawings and dreams. Their little home finally felt safe, no longer a battlefield of unpaid bills and silent grief. At night, Ethan would tuck Grace into bed, pulling the blanket under her chin the way Sarah used to. She'd ask for stories, sometimes about her mother, sometimes about the Marines, sometimes just about hope. Ethan's voice no longer cracked under the weight of sorrow. He told her stories that ended with laughter, not tears. Slowly, the nightmares loosened their grip on both of them. Margaret remained in the shadows of her estate, still unable to step freely into the world. But she was no longer the untouchable figure Ethan once feared. She asked about Grace often, listening quietly as Ethan described her stubbornness, her courage, her smile. In those rare moments, Margaret's hard exterior softened, revealing the mother she had once wished to be. It wasn't friendship, but it was connection. Ethan's anger toward Margaret never vanished completely, but it no longer consumed him. He understood now that she had lived with her own torment, trapped by choices that destroyed both her and him. Forgiveness was complicated, messy, unfinished, but it grew slowly between them. Sarah's memory remained sacred, untouchable. And Ethan learned that holding on to rage would only rob Grace of the father she needed. Grace flourished in ways Ethan hadn't dared hope. She laughed louder, slept more peacefully, and asked fewer painful questions about her mother. She didn't understand the darkness her father carried, but she felt the love he poured into her every day. Ethan watched her grow with pride, realizing Sarah would have wanted this, a life rebuilt, not ruined. Love became the legacy stronger than loss. Margaret's empire was no longer built on fear, but on redemption. Her name began appearing in the news again, not as the cold recluse, but as a philanthropist. People speculated about her motives, but Ethan knew the truth. Every donation, every new program, was Margaret's way of paying penance. And though the world judged her, Ethan silently understood. She wasn't seeking glory. She was seeking peace. As spring came to Oak Ridge, Ethan stood on his porch watching Grace chase fireflies in the yard. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel hollow. Margaret's mansion still loomed in the distance, a reminder of secrets and pain. But it also reminded him of survival, of the fragile bond forged from grief. Ethan no longer lived in the shadow of Sarah's death. He lived carrying her love forward, one day at a time. Life rarely ties its endings with ribbons. Ethan knew he would always carry scars, pieces of Sarah's absence etched into his soul. But he also knew scars didn't mean weakness, they meant survival. Each morning he woke with purpose, not just for himself, but for Grace. She became his compass, guiding him out of the darkness. Margaret remained in her world of shadows, but she was no longer the villain in Ethan's eyes. She was a woman undone by choices, consumed by grief, and finally humbled by truth. Her fortune now served the broken, the forgotten, the lost. She could never erase the past, but she could bend the future toward light, and in that, Ethan saw her redemption. Grace grew into the kind of child Sarah would have been proud of, bright, bold, unafraid to dream. Her laughter filled the little house like music, chasing away the silence that once haunted its walls. She never knew how close her father had come to losing himself to vengeance. She only knew that he had chosen love instead, and that choice shaped her childhood. Ethan often thought of Michael, a boy swallowed by mistakes and manipulation. It was easier to hate him when he was just a name on a report. Harder when he became a broken son, caught in a war he never understood. Ethan's anger softened with time, not because Michael was innocent, but because rage could no longer rule his life. Forgiveness didn't excuse, it freed. In quiet moments, Ethan visited Sarah's grave, Grace's small hand tucked into his. He told her about Grace's milestones, her courage, her stubborn streak that mirrored Sarah's own. The pain never vanished, but it no longer defined him. Instead, Sarah became a light he carried forward. Love, not loss, became her legacy. Margaret never asked Ethan for forgiveness again, but he saw it in her eyes every time they met. She gave without expecting thanks, knowing her wealth could never buy absolution. Her philanthropy became her confession, her penance written in brick and mortar. The world saw a billionaire turned saint, but Ethan saw something simpler, a mother trying to heal her soul. Oak Ridge slowly forgot the whispers about that poor man. To them, Ethan was just a father who worked hard, who cheered at school plays, who kept his lawn neat. They didn't see the battles he had fought in silence. But Ethan didn't need them to. His life wasn't measured by what others thought. It was measured in Grace's smile each night. The bond between Ethan and Margaret remained fragile, unspoken, but unbreakable. They rarely shared more than a few words, yet beneath the silence was an understanding carved by grief. They weren't friends, they weren't allies. They were survivors of intertwined tragedies, carrying each other's truths like heavy stones. And that was enough. Ethan no longer dreamed of revenge, no longer saw himself as a victim. He was a father, a protector, a man who had chosen to rise instead of sink. The world had tried to break him, but love held him together. He had found peace not in erasing pain, but in carrying it with strength. And in that peace, he discovered freedom. Life's cruelest losses can birth its deepest lessons. Ethan's story wasn't about a billionaire's secret or a husband's rage. It was about resilience, redemption, and the choice to heal. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it can transform the future. And if you believe in stories of hope, family, and survival, please subscribe for more. Because sometimes the darkest shadows lead us to the brightest light.